The rifle trembled in her hands, not from fear, but from rage. Martha Bell had survived mockery her entire life. The whispers. The sideways glances. The cruel laughter that followed her wide hips and soft body through every street in Dry Willow. But tonight, cornered in her own father's storeroom by 3 drunk cattle drivers with violence in their eyes, she learned that shame could transform into something far more dangerous, the absolute refusal to be broken. What happened next would change everything. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far Martha's story travels across the world. The August heat in Dry Willow didn't just settle, it suffocated. It pressed down on the town like a wool blanket soaked in river water, thick and unforgiving. By late afternoon, even the dogs had surrendered, sprawled in whatever shade they could find, tongues lolling, too exhausted to chase the chickens that strutted past with impunity. Martha Bell moved through the supply store with practiced efficiency, her fingers trailing across wooden crates and burlap sacks as she counted inventory in her father's leather-bound ledger. Numbers had always made sense to her in ways people never had. They were honest. Predictable. A column of figures never looked at her with pity or disgust. She was 28 years old, broad-shouldered and full-bodied, with strong arms that could heft flour sacks most men struggled with. Her hair, dark as river stones, was pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to soften the plainness of her face. She'd long ago stopped trying to be pretty. Pretty was for women like Eleanor Hutchins, who floated through town in ruffled dresses, collecting suitors like wildflowers. Pretty was a language Martha had never learned to speak. The store smelled of leather and tobacco, dried beans and gun oil, her father's smell, though he'd been dead 3 months now. Hart gave out while hauling supplies from the back room. They'd found him crumpled between the pickle barrels and the seed displays, ledger still clutched in his weathered hand. The doctor said it was quick. Martha thought that was supposed to be a comfort. It wasn't. Now the store was hers, the inventory, the debt, the endless weight of keeping it running in a town that would rather see it fail than admit a woman could manage it alone. She'd heard the talk at the church social last Sunday. Poor Martha. No husband. No prospects. That store will be bankrupt by winter. Mrs. Henderson had said it loud enough for half the congregation to hear, her voice dripping with false sympathy that tasted like vinegar. Martha had smiled, nodded, and mentally calculated that Mrs. Henderson's account was $63 past due. The afternoon stretched long. A few customers came and went, old Tom Brennan buying tobacco, Sarah Chin picking up thread and buttons, young Billy Watts sent by his mother for a pound of sugar. Martha served them all with quiet competence, making change, wrapping purchases, adding figures to accounts. Normal. Routine. She should have locked the door at 5. She should have trusted the prickling sensation at the back of her neck when the 3 men walked in just before closing, their boots heavy on the wooden floor, their laughter too loud, too sharp. Cattle drivers. She recognized the type even if she didn't know their faces. They moved through towns like locusts, drinking their pay, looking for entertainment in all the wrong places. The tall one had a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The stocky one wore a leather vest stained with trail dust and worse. The third, youngest, had mean eyes and a smile that never reached them. Help you, gentlemen? Martha kept her voice level, professional. She didn't move from behind the counter. Heard there was a woman running this place now. Scarface leaned against a support beam, too casual, too comfortable. Didn't quite believe it. My father passed. The store is mine. She closed the ledger with deliberate precision. We're closing soon. If you need supplies, I can help you quickly. Oh, we need supplies. Leather vest grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Question is, what kind of supplies a woman like you can provide? The air in the room changed. Martha felt it like a storm front moving in, that electric charge before lightning splits the sky. Her hand moved beneath the counter, fingers finding the cold metal of her father's rifle. I have dry goods, tools, ammunition, and tobacco. If you need something else, the saloon is 2 streets over. Her voice remained steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Friendly, ain't she? Mean Eyes pushed away from the door, taking a step closer. We just rode in from 3 weeks on the trail. Long, dusty weeks. A man gets lonely, then I suggest you visit the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson keeps clean rooms. Martha's fingers tightened on the rifle. Now, I need to close. Come back tomorrow if you need supplies, we're not done talking. Scarface moved away from the beam. The 3 of them spread out, no longer casual, movements coordinated like wolves circling prey. Martha pulled the rifle up, holding it across her chest. The weight was familiar. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, though he'd never expected she'd need to point it at a man. I believe we are done talking. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Leave. Now, they laughed. Actually laughed. Look at her, Leather Vest said, delighted. She's gonna shoot us. With that rifle she can barely hold steady. The rifle was shaking. Martha knew it. They knew it. The trembling betrayed her, or so they thought. They couldn't know that the shaking wasn't fear alone. It was rage. A lifetime of rage compressed into this single moment. Every cruel word. Every mocking laugh. Every time she'd been dismissed, discarded, deemed unworthy of basic human dignity. Too much woman for no man to want, Mean Eyes said, moving closer to the counter. That's what they say about you, ain't it? Too wide, too plain, too, shut your mouth. The words came out low, dangerous, or what? He reached for her apron string across the counter. You gonna shoot me, sweetheart? Doubt you ever pulled that trigger in your. The door didn't open. It exploded. One moment it was closed. The next, it was swinging on broken hinges, and a man stood in the doorframe, backlit by the dying sun, dust motes swirling around him like disturbed spirits. Ezekiel Crow. Even in a town as small as Dry Willow, everyone knew the name. The Ridge Hunter. The wild man who lived up in the high country, coming down maybe twice a year for supplies and salt. Stories about him ranged from the believable, that he could track a deer across solid rock, to the fantastical, that he'd killed a mountain lion with his bare hands, that he'd survived a grisly attack that should have killed him, that he could disappear into wilderness so completely that not even the Shoshone scouts could find him. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that spoke of a life spent hauling water and splitting wood. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark and unkempt. His face was all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin, a scar cutting through his beard along his jaw. He wore buckskin pants and a shirt that might have been white once but was now the color of creek water. A hunting knife hung from his belt, the handle worn smooth from use, but it was his eyes that made grown men step aside when he walked past. Gray as winter sky. Empty as mountain peaks. Eyes that had seen things and decided most of humanity wasn't worth the trouble. Those eyes swept the room, taking in the scene in half a heartbeat. Martha with the rifle. The 3 men spread around her, the predatory stance of their bodies. Ezekiel didn't shout. Didn't threaten. Didn't announce himself, he simply moved. One moment he was at the door. The next, he had Scarface's wrist twisted behind his back at an angle that made the man scream. The sound was high-pitched, animal. Before the other 2 could react, Ezekiel had slammed Scarface face first into a barrel of dried beans, then pivoted with terrifying efficiency. Leather Vest lunged. Ezekiel caught him mid-stride with an elbow to the solar plexus that folded the man like wet paper. He went down gasping, hands clutched to his stomach, trying to remember how to breathe. Mean Eyes grabbed for his pistol. He was fast, probably thought he was the fastest. He wasn't. Ezekiel's hand closed around Mean Eyes' throat, lifting him onto his toes. The man's fingers scrabbled at that iron grip, his face turning purple. For 3 long seconds, Ezekiel held him there, watching him struggle, letting him understand how quickly this could end. Then he dropped him, Mean eyes collapsed, coughing, retching, "Get up." Ezekiel's voice was rough from disuse, like gravel scraping across stone. The three men struggled to their feet, clutching various injuries. Scarface's wrist hung at an odd angle. Leather vest still couldn't straighten completely. Mean eyes rubbed his throat, eyes watering. "Take off your hats." Ezekiel stood between them and Martha, arms loose at his sides. "What, your hats?" "Remove them." Slowly, reluctantly, they pulled off their dusty hats. "Now apologize to Miss Bell." "By name, you're crazy." Ezekiel moved, and Scarface flinched so hard he stumbled backward into a shelf. Jars rattled. "By name, sorry, Miss Bell." Mean eyes went first, voice hoarse. "Didn't mean nothing, Miss Bell." Leather vest followed, eyes on the floor. Scarface hesitated. Ezekiel took one step forward. The man broke. "Sorry, Martha Bell. We're sorry, not for scaring her." Ezekiel's voice dropped lower, colder. "For thinking she was weak. For thinking she wouldn't fight back. For thinking you had any right to step foot in her store and disrespect her in her own place. That's what you apologize for." Silence filled the space. Martha stood frozen behind the counter, rifle still in her hands, watching this man she'd never spoken to defend not just her body, but her dignity. Her worth. "We're sorry for that," Mean eyes finally whispered. "For thinking, for assuming, get out." Ezekiel moved aside, gesturing to the broken door. "If I see any of you in Dry Willow tomorrow, I'll finish what I started." "Understood." They ran. Three grown men scrambling over each other to get through the door, stumbling into the dirt street, fleeing into the gathering dusk. The store fell silent except for Martha's ragged breathing. She lowered the rifle slowly, her arms shaking now from the adrenaline draining out of her system. She wanted to say thank you. She wanted to say something meaningful, something worthy of what had just happened. Instead, she just stood there, staring at this stranger who'd appeared like something out of a legend. Ezekiel turned to face her. Up close, she could see the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, the white scar tissue on his knuckles, the way he held himself like a man who'd long ago decided the company of trees was preferable to people. "You all right?" he asked. Martha nodded. Then shook her head. Then nodded again. Yes. Thank you." "I don't, thank you." He studied her for a long moment. "You were holding that rifle wrong." Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "What? Your stance? You had the stock too high. Would have broken your shoulder if you'd fired. Knocked you backward." He gestured. "You know how to shoot, my father taught me. Years ago, taught you wrong." He moved to the broken door, examining the damage. "This needs fixing before dark. You got tools?" "In the back room." "But you don't have to, those men might come back. With friends." He glanced at her. "Door needs to be secure." Martha found herself nodding, moving on instinct. She led him to the back room, where her father's tools hung on pegboard, organized by size and function. Ezekiel selected a hammer, nails, and measuring tape with the same efficiency he'd used to disable 3 men. She watched him work. He moved without wasted motion, testing the hinges, reinforcing the frame, adding a crossbar that could be dropped into place from the inside. The sun set while he worked, orange light bleeding into purple dusk. "You stood your ground," he said without looking up from the door. "Most men don't." Martha felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pity. Not patronization. Respect. Simple, honest respect. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage isn't not being scared. It's standing anyway." He tested the door, satisfied with the repair. "That rifle still needs fixing though." "Your stance, I'm not sure it matters now." Ezekiel turned to look at her fully then. In the lamplight, his face looked less harsh, more human. Tired. Maybe even sad. It matters, he said quietly. What happened tonight? That was me. Next time, it needs to be you. There won't be a next time. There's always a next time. He collected the tools, hanging them back in their proper places without being told where they went. Men like that don't learn. They just get angrier. Martha felt cold despite the lingering heat. She'd been so focused on surviving the moment, she hadn't thought about tomorrow. Or next week. Or next month. I can't leave, she said, more to herself than him. This store is all I have. Didn't say you should leave. Ezekiel moved toward the door. Said you need to learn to shoot proper. He was leaving. Of course he was leaving. Men like him didn't linger. Didn't form connections. She'd heard the stories. He came down from the mountains, got supplies, vanished again. Sometimes for months. Wait. The word came out before she could stop it. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Martha's mind raced. An idea was forming, reckless, probably foolish, but refusing to be ignored. You said I need to learn to shoot properly. To defend myself. You do, then teach me. Ezekiel turned slowly. What? Teach me to shoot. To track. To survive. Whatever you know that could help me. She gestured around the store. Keep this. Stay alive. Not be. She struggled for the word. Pray. He stared at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly to the moon. I can pay, she added quickly. Not money. I know mountain men don't need much. But supplies. Food. Organization. Whatever you need that I can provide. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. Martha met his eyes, refusing to look away. I'm asking to not be helpless. I'm asking for a chance to become someone those men would think twice about touching. I'm asking, her voice cracked. I'm asking for someone to teach me how to be strong. The silence stretched. In the distance, she could hear the saloon piano, the murmur of evening conversation, the normal sounds of a town settling into night. I leave at first light, Ezekiel finally said. Back to the high country. Martha's shoulders slumped. Of course. She'd asked too much. Expected too much, but, he continued, and her head snapped up, come autumn, when I need winter supplies, we could talk about an arrangement. Autumn. That was 2 months away. What if something happens before then? Keep that rifle close. Lock your doors. Stay around people. He studied her. You survived tonight. You're stronger than you think. I didn't survive. You saved me. No. He shook his head. You stood your ground. You pulled that rifle. You didn't beg or cry or give them what they wanted. That's strength, Miss Bell. That's what kept you alive until I showed up. Remember that. He walked through the repaired door into the night. Martha stood in the empty store, surrounded by inventory and ledgers and the lingering scent of gun oil, something unfamiliar burning in her chest. Hope, dangerous, foolish, absolutely terrifying hope. 2 months, she thought. 2 months to keep the store running. To stay safe. To stay alive. And then, maybe then, she could learn to be someone different. Someone who didn't flinch when men laughed. Someone who took up space without apology. Someone who fired back. She locked the door, dropped the new crossbar into place, and stood there in the silence, feeling the weight of the rifle in her hands. This time tomorrow, Ezekiel Crow would be miles away, vanished into those high mountains like smoke. But autumn would come, and Martha Bell would be waiting. Autumn came slowly to Dry Willow, like a guest uncertain of their welcome. The cottonwoods along the river turned gold first, their leaves catching afternoon light and holding it like captured fire. Then the aspens on the distant ridges followed, whole mountainsides blazing yellow and orange against the evergreen dark of pine forests. The air developed an edge, that particular sharpness that warned of winter waiting just beyond the horizon. Martha marked the days in her ledger, not with calendar notations but with tallies of supplies ordered, debts collected, inventory restocked. 63 days since that August night. 63 days of locking doors before dusk, of sleeping with her father's rifle within arm's reach, of jumping at shadows and loud voices. The 3 cattle drivers had left town the next morning, as Ezekiel had promised they would. But their departure hadn't erased the memory of their hands reaching, their laughter echoing, the way they'd looked at her like she was something to be used and discarded. The town treated her differently now. Some of it was respect, grudging, uncomfortable respect for the woman who'd faced down trouble and survived. Mrs. Henderson's account was suddenly paid in full, delivered with tight-lipped efficiency and no eye contact. Tom Brennan started tipping his hat when he came in for tobacco. Even the Methodist minister, who'd never quite approved of a woman running a business, nodded acknowledgement when their paths crossed on Sunday, but some of it was worse. Whispers followed her now, speculation about what had really happened that night, why Ezekiel Crow had appeared when he did, what a woman alone might have promised a man like that in exchange for protection. Martha heard fragments of it, not enough to confront, just enough to sting. She ignored it all and focused on work. The store had become more than her father's legacy. It had become proof that she could survive, that she could hold her ground, that she was more than the sum of other people's assumptions about her body and her worth. On the 64th day, the first snow dusted the high peaks. Martha saw it at dawn, standing on the store's back porch with a cup of bitter coffee, watching the mountains turn white against a pale sky. Her chest tightened. Winter was coming. Ezekiel had said autumn. This was autumn's end. She went about her morning routine, sweeping the floor, restocking the front shelves, updating account books, but her attention kept drifting to the door, to the street beyond, to the possibility that he wouldn't come at all. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe the offer had been empty words meant to comfort a frightened woman. Maybe. The door opened at 10:30. Ezekiel Crow walked in carrying 2 massive elk haunches over his shoulders like they weighed nothing. He'd been in the mountains for 2 months, and it showed. His hair was longer, wilder. His beard had filled in thick and dark. His buckskin clothing bore stains and repairs, the marks of a life lived hard and solitary. But his eyes were the same, that winter sky gray, sharp and assessing. Miss Bell. He lowered the elk meat onto her counter with a heavy thud. Need these smoked and stored. Also need salt, flour, coffee, ammunition, and wool if you've got it. Winter's coming early. Martha stared at him, words jamming in her throat. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, planned what she'd say, how she'd remind him of his promise. But now, facing him, she could only manage. You came back, said I would. He pulled a leather pouch from his belt, coins clinking. How much for the smoking and storage, you said. She stopped, started again. In August, you said we could discuss an arrangement. About teaching me. Ezekiel went very still. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Martha couldn't read his expression. Regret? Annoyance? She felt her hope beginning to curdle into embarrassment. You still want that? He finally asked. Yes. Why? The question surprised her. Because I don't want to be afraid anymore. Because I don't want to need saving. Because, she gestured helplessly. Because I'm tired of being weak. You're not weak. I couldn't even hold the rifle properly. That's ignorance, not weakness. Different things. He leaned against the counter, studying her with those unsettling eyes. Teaching you to shoot, to track, to survive, that's not a week's work. That's months. Winter's coming. I need to be in the high country, in my cabin, before the heavy snows hit. Martha's heart sank. Of course. She'd been foolish to hope, but, Ezekiel continued. And that word felt like a lifeline thrown across dark water. My cabin needs work before winter. Roof's got holes. Supply situation is chaos. Haven't done a proper inventory in years. If you came up to the ridge, help me get organized, get ready for winter, I could teach you while you worked. Fair trade, come up to your cabin. Martha's voice came out higher than intended. Live there, temporarily. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Until the first heavy snow. Then you'd need to get back down before the passes close. He straightened, shouldering one of the elk haunches again. Think about it. I'll be in town 3 days getting supplies together. You decide, you meet me at the North Trailhead dawn of the 4th day. You don't, I'll assume you changed your mind. Wait, what about the store? That's for you to figure out. He moved toward the door. Miss Bell, if you're serious about learning to survive, you need to understand something right now. Survival means making hard choices. Means sacrificing comfort for capability. Means risk. He paused in the doorway. Question is whether you want it bad enough to take that risk. The door closed behind him, leaving Martha alone with racing thoughts and an impossible decision. She spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled panic. The practical part of her brain, the part that managed inventory and balanced accounts, laid out the problems with clinical precision. The store couldn't close for 2 months. Her few customers would go elsewhere, probably to the new mercantile that had opened on the east side of town. The debt she'd been carefully paying down would grow again. And living alone in the mountains with a strange man? The scandal alone could ruin what little reputation she had left, but another part of her, quieter but growing louder, whispered different truths. What was reputation worth if she spent the rest of her life afraid? What were customers worth if she couldn't defend her own store? And scandal? She almost laughed. She was already the subject of gossip, already considered odd, unmarriageable, pitiable. What did she have to lose that hadn't already been lost? On the second day, she approached young Billy Watts's older brother, Thomas, who'd recently returned from failed prospecting in California. She offered him temporary management of the store, basic sales only, no credit extended, no major decisions. He'd get 20% of sales and room in the back. It wasn't ideal, but Thomas was honest if not particularly bright, and he needed work. Were you going, Miss Bell? He asked, confused. Away, she said. For a few weeks. Personal business. On the 3rd day, she packed. Not dresses and petticoats, she had no illusions about what mountain life required. She took her sturdiest skirts, her warmest shawls, practical boots her father had ordered from a catalog but never had the chance to wear. She took her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. She took her father's rifle and 3 boxes of ammunition. She took a small leather journal and 2 pencils. She did not take her fear. She left that behind deliberately, locked in a room in her mind she refused to open. Dawn of the 4th day found her at the North Trailhead, pack on her back, rifle in hand, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold. The trail disappeared into aspen still clinging to their last leaves, leading up into country she'd never seen, toward a life she couldn't imagine. He materialized from the trees so quietly she gasped. Ezekiel stood there fully loaded, massive pack, rifle, hunting knife, coiled rope, all the gear of a man prepared for anything. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her practical clothing, her determined expression, the way she held the rifle. You came, he said, and something in his voice suggested he hadn't been certain she would. I came. It's a hard climb. 8 miles uphill. We won't reach the cabin until late afternoon, then we should start walking. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Follow me. Step where I step. Tell me if you need to stop. No shame in resting. He turned and walked into the forest. Martha followed. The first mile was easy, relatively flat, the trail wide and well-worn by game and the occasional hunter. Martha kept pace, her breathing steady, her pack weight distributed properly. She'd carried heavy loads in the store for years. This was just inventory delivery to a different location, she told herself. The second mile introduced switchbacks, the trail climbing steadily through aspens and scattered pine. Her thighs began to burn. She focused on Ezekiel's back, the rhythmic swing of his stride, and matched her breathing to her steps. The third mile, the trail narrowed and steepened. Loose rocks made footing treacherous. Martha's pack straps dug into her shoulders. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cool air. But she didn't ask to stop. Didn't complain. Just kept moving. Ezekiel paused at a stream crossing, kneeling to refill his canteen. Martha did the same, the ice-cold water shocking against her flushed face. When she looked up, he was watching her. "You're stronger than you look," he said. "I've been hauling flour sacks since I was 14. City strength and mountain strength are different. You're doing well." He stood, shouldering his pack. "Next 4 miles are harder. Don't be stubborn. Tell me if you need rest." But Martha had spent her entire life being told she wasn't strong enough, wasn't capable enough, wasn't enough. Admitting weakness now felt like proving all of them right. So she gritted her teeth and climbed. The 4th mile taught her that pain could become background noise if you let it. The 5th mile taught her that background noise could crescendo into symphony. By the 6th mile, her legs were shaking, her breathing ragged, dark spots dancing at the edges of her vision. "Stop." Ezekiel's hand on her shoulder halted her forward momentum. "Sit. Drink. Eat something. I'm fine, you're about to collapse. Sit down before you fall down." Pride wanted her to refuse. But her body had other ideas. Her knees buckled, and she sat heavily on a fallen log, head swimming. Ezekiel pressed jerky and dried apple slices into her hands. "Eat. Slowly. Small bites," she obeyed, too exhausted to argue. The food helped. The water helped more. After 10 minutes, the world stopped tilting quite so dramatically. "Why didn't you stop earlier?" Ezekiel asked. He sat across from her, eating his own rations with efficient bites. "Didn't want to slow you down, stupid reason. You know what happens to people who push past their limits in the mountains. They make mistakes. Twisted ankles, falls, worse. Pride kills up here faster than bears or cold." His tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "If you're going to learn to survive, first lesson is knowing your limits and respecting them." Martha felt shame burn through her fatigue. "I just wanted to prove, you don't need to prove anything to me. I already know you're tough. You stood up to 3 armed men with a rifle you could barely hold. That's tougher than most men I've known." He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "But tough doesn't mean indestructible. Learn the difference." They climbed the final 2 miles at a slower pace. Ezekiel called more frequent stops, pointed out landmarks, showed her how to read the forest, broken branches indicating game trails, scratched bark marking territory, scat revealing what animals lived here. He talked more in those 2 miles than he probably had in weeks, and Martha realized he was distracting her from exhaustion with education. The cabin appeared as the sun angled toward the western peaks. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, backed against a granite outcropping that provided natural shelter from north winds. Smoke-stained logs. A stone chimney. One visible window with an actual glass pane, surprisingly intact. A small covered porch with what might have once been a rocking chair, now missing one rocker. It looked exactly like what it was, a place built for survival, not comfort. Ezekiel dropped his pack on the porch. "Welcome to my kingdom." "It's not much." Martha studied the cabin with the same assessing eye she used for store inventory. Roof sagging on the left side. Gaps between logs where chinking had fallen out. The porch boards rotted in places. Firewood stacked haphazardly against the east wall, exposed to weather. No root cellar visible, which meant food storage was probably inadequate. "You're right," she said. "It's not much. It's also fixable." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe respect. "You really meant it. About helping organize, I don't say things I don't mean." She climbed the porch steps, testing boards carefully. "Show me inside. I need to assess what we're working with." The interior was as chaotic as she'd feared. One room serving as kitchen, sleeping area, and storage. A stone fireplace dominated the west wall, soot-stained but well-built. Sleeping platform in the corner with furs piled haphazardly. A rough-hewn table and one chair. Supplies scattered everywhere, ammunition boxes mixed with food stores, pelts draped over furniture. Tools lying where they'd last been used, but beneath the chaos, she saw potential. Good bones. Solid construction. A man who knew how to build shelter but had never learned to maintain it. "It's disaster," Ezekiel said flatly. "I know. I spend most of my time outside anyway." Martha set down her pack, rolled up her sleeves. "It's organized chaos. Which means it can be organized properly. But first, I need you to teach me something." "What?" She pulled out her father's rifle, held it the way she'd held it that night in August. "You said my stance was wrong. Show me the right way." Ezekiel stared at her, then slowly nodded. "All right. But not with that rifle. Too heavy for you. I've got something better." He moved to a cabinet, pulled out a smaller rifle, still deadly, but proportioned differently. "This was my sister's. She was built more like you. Solid, strong, but not tall. Try it." Martha took the rifle, felt the difference immediately. The weight distributed better. The stock fit her shoulder properly. "Good. Now, your feet." Ezekiel moved behind her, not touching but positioning his own body to demonstrate. Shoulder width apart. Left foot slightly forward if you're right-handed. You want stability, not width. Weight slightly forward, knees soft, not locked. Martha adjusted, feeling awkward under his instruction. Stock tight into your shoulder. I mean tight. If there's any gap, the recoil will bruise you or worse. Cheek to the stock. Line up your eye with the sight. Both eyes open until you're ready to fire, then you can close your off eye. Both eyes, better field of vision. You need to see what's around your target, not just the target. His voice was patient, instructional. Now, breathe. In, out. At the bottom of your exhale, when your body is naturally still, that's when you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Don't yank. Gentle pressure, like you're trying not to wake someone. Martha stood there, feeling the rifle become an extension of her body rather than a foreign object. The difference was profound. We'll practice tomorrow with actual rounds. For now, I want you to practice stance. 10 minutes, 3 times a day. Build the muscle memory. He took the rifle back gently. It's getting dark. I'll start a fire, make food. You rest. Tomorrow, we start real work. That night, Martha lay on the sleeping platform while Ezekiel took the floor by the fire, refusing to let her sleep there despite her protests that it was his cabin. The furs smelled like smoke and pine and wild things. Through the window, she could see stars so bright and numerous they looked like spilled salt across black cloth. She was sore everywhere. Exhausted. Uncertain what she'd committed herself to, but for the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't afraid. The days fell into rhythm, each one measured by work and learning, by small victories and frustrated failures. Martha woke before dawn to the sound of Ezekiel building up the fire, the smell of coffee boiling in a battered tin pot. They ate breakfast in near silence, cornmeal mush or fried salt pork, practical fuel for the day ahead. Then the work began. Mornings were for shooting practice. Ezekiel set up targets at increasing distances, first tin cans on fallen logs at 20 paces, then pine cones at 40, then marks carved into tree bark at 60. Martha's shoulder bloomed purple and yellow from the recoil despite proper stance, her fingers blistered from the trigger guard. Her arms aching from holding position. But slowly, incrementally, her shots began to find their marks. Don't aim where it is, Ezekiel instructed one morning, watching her miss a running rabbit he'd startled from the brush. Aim where it's going to be. Lead the target. Anticipate. She tried again, missed again. Frustration burned hot in her chest. It's impossible. It's moving too fast. Nothing's impossible. You're just thinking too much. He took the rifle, loaded a round, tracked a bird crossing overhead and fired in one fluid motion. The bird dropped. You don't calculate. You feel. Your body knows what your brain takes too long to figure out. That's not helpful advice. It's the only advice there is. You can't logic your way through survival. You have to become it. He handed back the rifle. Again, Martha practiced until her arms shook, until she could barely lift the rifle. And when she finally hit a moving target, a squirrel darting between trees, Ezekiel nodded once, simple approval that felt like a medal. Afternoons were for the cabin. Martha approached the chaos with the same methodical precision she'd used in the store. She cataloged everything first, creating inventory lists in her small journal. 57 pounds of dried meat, poorly stored and already developing mold in places. 32 pelts of varying quality, some improperly stretched. 8 pounds of salt, 3 of sugar, 20 of flour. Ammunition for 4 different caliber weapons, mixed together in leather pouches. Tools scattered across every surface. Seeds, precious seeds for spring planting, stored in a damp corner where they'd likely rot before winter ended. You live like an animal, she told him bluntly on the third day, holding up a moldy venison strip. Animals are cleaner. I live like a lazy bachelor. He was repairing the roof. Replacing shingles split by last winter's ice. Why do you think I agreed to this arrangement? She threw the ruined meat into the burn pile, made a note in her journal. 20% lost to poor storage. Unacceptable. She reorganized the food supplies by type and preservation method, hung the dried meat from ceiling rafters where air could circulate, transferred flour and sugar to sealed containers she fashioned from cleaned-out ammunition boxes. She stretched the improperly cured pelts again, teaching herself technique through trial and error. She sorted ammunition, created a system, labeled everything with charcoal marks. Ezekiel watched her transform his cabin with something like wonder. You're terrifying, he said one afternoon, coming inside to find she'd completely rearranged his sleeping area, built shelves from scrap wood, and created a designated space for weapons cleaning. I'm efficient. There's a difference. She gestured to the new shelves. Your hunting knife goes here. Always here. Not on the table, not by the door, not wherever you dropped it last. Here. So when you need it, you know where it is. Yes, ma'am. His tone was amused, not mocking, and stop sleeping on the floor. I built a second sleeping platform. We're both adults. We can share space without scandal this far from town. Something flickered across his face. People already assume. People assume things about me the day I was born too large and too plain for their liking. I stopped caring what people assumed years ago. She met his eyes. Besides, you sleep by the door. If someone comes in the night, you're the first line of defense. It's tactical, not improper, he nodded slowly. You've thought about this. I think about everything. It's exhausting. She turned back to her inventory. Now, about your root cellar situation. You don't have one. We need to dig one before ground freeze, or you'll lose half your winter stores to spoilage. They dug the root cellar together over the course of a week. Ezekiel provided the muscle and the knowledge of where to site it, far enough from the cabin to prevent foundation issues. Close enough for convenient access, positioned to take advantage of natural cold. Martha provided the organizational planning, calculating volume needed, designing shelving systems, determining optimal storage conditions for different food types. The physical labor was brutal. Martha's hands, soft from years of paperwork and store work, developed blisters that burst and bled, then calloused over. Her back screamed protest each evening. But she noticed something changing in her body. Muscles that had always been there, hidden under softness, began to define themselves. Her shoulders broadened. Her arms gained visible strength. She was still large, still broad-hipped and soft-bodied. But now that body felt powerful rather than shameful. Ezekiel noticed too, though he said nothing directly. Instead, he began adjusting his teaching to her increasing capability. Longer hikes. Heavier loads. More complex tracking exercises. He taught her to read sign, the pressed grass of a deer bed, the scattered feathers of a hawk kill, the territorial scraping of a mountain lion. He taught her to move quietly, to test each footfall before committing weight, to use terrain for concealment. He taught her which plants were edible, which medicinal, which deadly. "Why do you know all this?" she asked one afternoon as he showed her how to identify poisonous mushrooms. "Most hunters know game and rifles." "You know everything." He was quiet for a long moment, rolling a bright red mushroom between his fingers. "Had a sister. Sarah. She was curious about everything. Wanted to understand how the world worked, why things grew where they did, what made animals behave certain ways. I learned because she wanted to learn, and nobody else would teach her." It was the first time he'd mentioned his sister directly. Martha waited, sensing there was more. She was brilliant. Read every book she could get her hands on. Taught herself Latin from a stolen textbook. Drew maps of places she'd never been, accurate enough to use. His voice went distant. But she was also unconventional. Opinionated. Refused to pretend stupidity to make men comfortable. Wore her skirts too short for berry picking. Laughed too loud. Took up too much space. Martha's chest tightened. She knew this story, even without hearing the end. They broke her, Ezekiel continued, voice flat. Not with violence. With smaller cruelties. Whispers. Exclusion. Making her feel wrong for existing as herself. By the time she was 20, she barely spoke. Stopped eating properly. Started believing she was the problem. He crushed the mushroom in his fist, red pulp oozing between his fingers. I tried to protect her. Tried to make her see she was perfect exactly as she was. But I was young. Stupid. Didn't understand that protection without power is just bearing witness to destruction. What happened to her? She died. Not dramatically. Just slowly stopped living until her body gave up. He wiped his hand on his pants, stood abruptly. That's when I left. Came up here. Decided humanity wasn't worth the effort. Martha stood too, her hand reaching out instinctively to his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. You saved me that night because of her, Martha said softly. You saw her in me. I saw someone fighting to take up space in a world that wanted to shrink her. His gray eyes met hers. I won't let that happen again. Not if I can help it. The moment stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding, with grief recognized and witnessed. Then Ezekiel stepped back. Breaking contact, professional distance reasserting itself. Come on. Still got 2 hours of daylight. I'm going to teach you to gut a deer. The lessons continued, each building on the last. But something had shifted. The transaction of teaching and learning had transformed into something else, something neither of them named but both felt. They worked in increasing harmony, anticipating each other's movements, communicating in abbreviated sentences and meaningful silences. Ezekiel carved her a chair that fit her body properly, wide enough for her hips, sturdy enough for her weight, positioned at the perfect height for the table. He didn't announce it or make ceremony of the gift. Just left it by the fire one morning. Martha repaired his coat, not to prettify it but to make it functional. She reinforced seams with double stitching, added interior pockets sized for specific tools, waterproofed the shoulders with rendered fat. She left it folded on his sleeping platform without comment. When Ezekiel returned from hunting with wool stockings from town, thick, properly sized, expensive, and placed them near her boots with a gruff, "Cold's coming," Martha felt something crack in her chest. Not pity. Not charity. Consideration. He'd thought about her comfort when she wasn't there to ask for it. The first serious snow came in early November, 6 weeks into her stay. They woke to white silence, the world transformed overnight. 3 inches had fallen, with clouds promising more. Ezekiel stood at the window, face tense. This is earlier than it should be. If it keeps up, the passes might close before you can get down safely. Martha joined him at the window, watching snow fall through pine branches. How long do we have? Week, maybe 2. After that, you'd be trapped here until spring thaw. She should have felt panic. Instead, she felt a strange calm. Then we'd better make sure all the winter preparations are complete. What still needs doing? He looked at her with something like amazement. You're not worried about being stuck up here? Would worrying change the weather? No, then it's wasted energy. She moved to the fire, began preparing breakfast. Make a list. Everything critical that needs finishing. We'll prioritize and execute. They worked with focused intensity for the next 3 days. Ezekiel reinforced the roof against heavy snow loads while Martha insulated gaps between logs with moss and clay. They stacked firewood under cover, organized tools for winter maintenance, double-checked food storage. Martha inventoried their supplies against winter projections, calculating consumption rates, identifying shortfalls. We're low on salt, she announced on the 3rd evening. And we could use more coffee. Also, medical supplies are inadequate. If either of us gets seriously injured, I'd have to go down to town. Get supplies before the next storm. Ezekiel studied the sky through the window. Weather's clear tomorrow. I could make it down and back in 2 days if I push hard. I'll come with you. No. You stay here. Keep the fire going, maintain the cabin. If something happens to me, you'll need shelter. Martha wanted to argue, but recognized the logic. Besides, she'd proven she could handle the rifle, could manage the cabin, could survive alone. This was its own kind of test. Ezekiel left at dawn, pack light for speed, rifle slung across his back. Fire stays lit. Door stays barred. You hear anything unusual, you climb to the loft and cover the ladder. Don't try to be heroic. Just survive until I return. I understand. Be careful. He paused at the door, turned back. For a moment, something unspoken hung between them, concern, trust, something deeper that neither was ready to name. Then he nodded once and disappeared into the forest. The cabin felt enormous in his absence. Martha kept busy, organized supplies that were already organized, practiced rifle drills, maintained the fire. But night came early this far into autumn, and the darkness pressed close against the windows. Every sound became threat. Every shift of timber became footsteps. She forced herself to be rational. She had weapons. She had shelter. She had skills now that she'd lacked 2 months ago. She was not helpless, but she was alone. The second day passed in similar fashion. Martha tried to read from the small collection of books Ezekiel kept, technical manuals mostly, a battered copy of Walden, surprisingly, a volume of Shakespeare's tragedies. She cooked, cleaned, practiced shooting at targets she'd set up near the cabin. Normal activities that felt hollow without Ezekiel's quiet presence balancing them. Night fell. Still no return. Martha told herself this was expected, that 2 days was his estimate, not his promise. But worry gnawed at her. What if he'd been injured on the trail? What if he'd fallen? What if? She woke to the sound of the door bar rattling. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then training took over. She rolled from the sleeping platform, grabbed the rifle, positioned herself at an angle where she could see the door but had cover from the fireplace. Martha. It's me. Let me in, Ezekiel's voice, but wrong somehow. Strained. Weak, she lifted the bar, pulled open the door. Ezekiel stood swaying in the doorframe, pack on his back, fresh blood soaking through his shirt at the shoulder. His face was gray with shock and pain. Roof, he managed. Cabin roof. Securing it. Before I left. Lost footing, he stumbled forward. Martha caught him, shocked by how much he was leaning on her. This man who seemed unbreakable, sit. By the fire. Now. Her voice came out commanding, brooking no argument. She helped him to his chair, began pulling off his pack and coat as gently as possible. The shirt underneath was soaked crimson. This needs to come off. I have to see the wound, just grazed. Caught a broken branch going down. Stupid, he hissed as she peeled fabric away from torn flesh. It was more than a graze. A deep gash ran from his shoulder blade toward his spine, maybe 6 inches long, edges ragged. Blood still welling, though slower now. Martha's stomach lurched, but she forced herself to focus. She'd helped her father with minor injuries in the store. This was just larger scale. I need to clean this. Stitch it. You have medical supplies, cabinet. Left side. Needle and thread. Whiskey for cleaning. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Shock setting in, Martha moved with purpose, gathering supplies, heating water, laying out everything she'd need. Her hands were steady even though her heart hammered. This was just another problem to solve, another task to complete. She would not let him die because she panicked. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. The gash was deep but clean, no debris visible. Good. She threaded the needle with hands that didn't shake, took a breath, and began to stitch. Ezekiel gritted his teeth, gripping the chair arms so hard his knuckles went white. But he didn't cry out, didn't pull away. He trusted her to do this right. That trust steadied Martha more than anything else could have. She worked slowly, carefully, pulling edges of torn flesh together, making small, even stitches the way she'd repaired torn fabric 1,000 times. Skin was just another material to mend. Muscle just another layer to align. She told herself this and kept working. When she finished, she bandaged the wound with clean cloth, wrapped his shoulder and torso to keep everything secure. Ezekiel was slumped in the chair, eyes half closed, face still too pale. You need to lie down. You've lost blood. You need rest. Got the supplies. Salt. Coffee. Laudanum, in case. He gestured vaguely at his shoulder. Lie down now. We'll inventory later. She helped him to his sleeping platform, arranged furs around him, pressed water into his hand. Drink. All of it, he obeyed, then collapsed back against the furs. You did good. With the stitching. Barely hurt, liar. I felt you shaking, still did good. His eyes closed. Thank you. Martha sat beside the sleeping platform through the night, checking his bandages, monitoring his breathing, changing compresses when fever started. She'd learned about medicinal plants, willow bark for pain and fever. She made tea from her stores. Coaxed him awake every few hours to drink. Toward dawn, she found herself talking, filling the silence with words she'd never planned to say. "I was afraid," she admitted to his sleeping form. "When you didn't come back on time. I realized I didn't want to be here alone. Not because I can't survive alone now, you taught me that I can. But because this place, this life, feels incomplete without you in it. And that terrifies me more than any cattle drivers ever did, because they could only hurt my body. This could hurt something deeper." Ezekiel's eyes opened, fever bright but aware. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice rough. "Not without you." Martha's breath caught. He'd heard her. Heard all of it. And instead of retreating, he'd answered with truth of his own. She took his hand, hot with fever, calloused from a lifetime of hard work, and held it gently. "Then get better. Because I'm not done learning yet." "Yes, ma'am." His grip tightened briefly, then relaxed as sleep claimed him again. Martha sat there as dawn light crept through the window, illuminating the cabin they'd built together from chaos and need and something neither of them had names for yet. The storm was coming. The passes would close. Winter would trap them in this small space for months, but for the first time in her life, being trapped didn't feel like prison. It felt like possibility. Ezekiel healed slowly, stubbornly, like a man unaccustomed to stillness. The fever broke after 3 days, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Martha enforced rest with the same ruthless efficiency she'd applied to organizing his cabin, ignoring his protests that he was fine, that work needed doing, that he'd survived worse. "You'll survive this too, by resting," she told him firmly, pressing another cup of willow bark tea into his hands. "I didn't stitch you back together just to watch you tear those stitches climbing around on the roof. Roof needs." "I checked the roof. I secured the loose sections. I can do more than keep ledgers, Ezekiel." She met his eyes with challenge. "You taught me that yourself." He subsided, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Pride, maybe. Or something more complicated. You're different than when you arrived. I'm the same person. Just less afraid." She sat in her chair, the one he'd made for her, and picked up her mending. "Now rest." "That's an order." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Yes, ma'am." Winter settled over the mountains with committed ferocity. Snow fell almost daily, transforming the world into endless white broken only by dark pine sentinels. The passes closed exactly when Ezekiel had predicted, cutting them off from dry willow and the world beyond. The cabin became their entire universe. And they adapted to its rhythms. Martha took over the hunting during Ezekiel's recovery, venturing out with rifle and determination. Her first solo hunt ended with a missed shot and a long, cold walk back empty-handed. The second yielded a rabbit, small but precious. The third, a week into December, she tracked a young buck through new snow, remembered everything Ezekiel had taught her about reading sign and anticipating movement, and brought it down with a single clean shot to the heart. She field-dressed it alone, her hand steady despite the gore, then hauled it back to the cabin on a makeshift sled. Ezekiel met her at the door, shoulder still bandaged but moving better now, and his face showed something beyond approval. "That's a fine kill," he said quietly. "Clean. Efficient. Your father would be proud. I'm not doing this for my father." She dragged the sled inside, began the process of butchering. "I'm doing it because we need meat and you're not healed enough to hunt yet." But later, as they ate venison steak cooked over the fire, she caught herself smiling. He was right. She was different. Capable in ways she'd never imagined possible. The long winter nights brought a different kind of intimacy. With darkness falling by 4 in the afternoon and dawn not coming until past 7, they had hours to fill. Ezekiel taught her to play chess on a board he'd carved years ago, the pieces crude but functional. Martha won her first game after 3 weeks of losses, and Ezekiel laughed, actually laughed, a sound so rare it startled her. "You've been letting me win," she accused. "No. You've been learning to think 3 moves ahead." "Different thing." He reset the board. Again, They talked during those long nights, conversations that ranged from practical to philosophical. Martha told him about her childhood, about a mother who died when she was 10, about inheriting her father's build and his business sense but none of his easy charisma. About learning that being useful was safer than trying to be loved. Ezekiel, in turn, shared fragments of his past. A father who drank. A mother who'd left when he was 8. Years of drifting, working cattle drives and logging camps, saving enough to buy his mountain land and build the cabin. The sister who'd been his only anchor, whose death had cut the last rope connecting him to civilization. I thought solitude would be peaceful, he admitted one night, staring into the fire. Turns out it's just lonely. I was too stubborn to admit it, and now? Martha asked softly. He looked at her then, really looked, and the weight of that gaze made her breath catch. Now I remember what it's like to have someone worth staying alive for. The words hung between them, honest and terrifying. Martha wanted to respond, to acknowledge what was building between them. But fear stopped her throat. What if she misunderstood? What if this was gratitude, not affection? What if a sound outside shattered the moment? Not wind. Not falling snow. Something else. Something wrong. Ezekiel was on his feet instantly despite his healing shoulder, rifle in hand. Martha grabbed her own weapon, training overriding panic. They positioned themselves on opposite sides of the window, watching. Shadows moved in the tree line. Not animals. The movement was wrong, too purposeful, too coordinated. Human shapes, at least 3 of them, approaching the cabin in the kind of careful formation that spoke of bad intentions. Raiders, Ezekiel breathed. There's a gang that works these mountains. Thought they'd moved south for winter. What do they want? Food. Supplies. Whatever they can take. His jaw tightened. They know this cabin. Tried to hit it 2 years back. I drove them off, but barely. How many are there usually? 5, 6. Hard to tell in this snow. He moved to bar the door, then checked the windows. We can hold them off if they try a direct assault. Cabins built for defense. But if they wait us out, we have enough supplies for 4 months, Martha said, mind racing through inventory. They don't, they also have numbers. And if that's Garrett's gang, they're not the type to give up easy. He looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time since they'd met. Not for himself. For her. Martha, listen to me. If this goes bad, if they get inside, they won't, but if they do, they won't, she repeated, harder. Because we're smarter, better prepared, and we're defending our home. They're just thieves looking for easy prey, a voice called from the darkness, rough and mocking. Crow. We know you're in there. Heard you got yourself a woman now. That true? Ezekiel's face went cold, dangerous. Don't respond. Don't let them know anything. Saw her in town before winter, the voice continued. Big woman. Pretty in her way. We could treat her real nice if you just open that door, share your supplies like good neighbors. Martha felt rage ignite in her chest. Familiar and clarifying. This was the same violation she'd faced in her store, just dressed in different words. Men who thought they could take what they wanted, who thought her body was theirs to claim, who assumed fear would make her compliant. They were about to learn otherwise. The loft, she whispered to Ezekiel. If I'm up there, I have a clear field of fire through that gap in the roof you haven't fixed yet. They won't expect shots from above, too dangerous. They'll see the muzzle flash, not if you're providing covering fire from down here. She was already moving, climbing the ladder to the sleeping loft. Draw their attention to the windows. I'll take them from where they're not looking. Martha, trust me. She positioned herself in the loft, finding the gap in the roofing where moonlight and snow filtered through. Perfect firing angle. She could see 3 shapes clearly now, moving closer to the cabin. 2 more hung back in the trees. On my signal, fire 1 shot through the east window. Make them think that's your only position. Ezekiel hesitated, then nodded. 3 count. 1, 2, Martha breathed, settling into her stance, checking her sight line. 3, Ezekiel's rifle cracked, shattering the night. Return fire immediately peppered the east wall, exactly as Martha had predicted. The raiders were focused on that window, moving to flank it. Martha tracked the nearest shape, leading the target just as Ezekiel had taught her, feeling rather than calculating the shot. She squeezed the trigger, the raider dropped, screaming. The others scattered, confused, trying to identify the second firing position. Martha was already reloading, hands moving with practiced speed. Another target appeared from behind a tree. She fired again. This shot went wide, but close enough to send the man diving for cover. There's 2 shooters, someone yelled from the darkness. They're fortified. Ezekiel fired again from a different window, keeping them guessing. Martha adjusted her position, found another target, fired. This one hit center mass. The man went down and didn't move. The remaining raiders broke. She could hear them shouting to each other, crashing through snow in retreat. Within minutes, the forest had swallowed them completely. Silence settled, broken only by Martha's harsh breathing and the ringing in her ears from gunfire. She stayed in position, rifle ready, scanning for movement. Nothing. They were gone, clear. Ezekiel finally called. Come down. Carefully, Martha descended the ladder on shaking legs. The adrenaline was draining now, leaving her hollow and trembling. Ezekiel caught her at the bottom, his good arm steadying her. You hit 2 of them. Maybe killed them both. His voice was neutral. But his eyes searched her face. You all right, was she? Martha examined the question honestly. She just shot 2 men, possibly killed them. Should she feel horror? Guilt? Instead, she felt only grim satisfaction and a strange, cold certainty. I defended our home, she said. I'm fine, most people aren't. After their first time, I'm not most people. She met his eyes. And this isn't my first time being attacked by men who thought I was easy prey. It's just the first time I was strong enough to fight back effectively. Something shifted in Ezekiel's expression, respect deepening into something more profound. No, he agreed quietly. You're definitely not most people. They spent the rest of the night on watch, taking turns sleeping, rifles always within reach. But the raiders didn't return. At dawn, Ezekiel went out to check, following blood trails in the snow. He returned an hour later, 1 dead. The other made it to the tree line, but he's losing blood badly. Won't make it far in this cold. The rest scattered. They won't be back. He stamped snow off his boots. Word will spread about this cabin being defended by 2 shooters. That's better than any fence, Martha nodded, stirring oatmeal for breakfast. Her hands were steady now. Good. Maybe they'll learn to find easier targets, Martha. Ezekiel's voice made her look up. What you did last night, that took serious courage. And skill. You saved us both. You would have done the same. I did do the same. 3 months ago in your store. Now you've returned the favor. He crossed to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. We're even. Partners. Equals. You understand that? I understand. Her voice came out softer than intended, do you? He was close now, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the fine scars on his face, the way his pulse jumped at his throat. Because I need you to understand something else. Last night, when they threatened you, when I thought I might lose you, he stopped, struggling for words. I've spent years avoiding connection. Avoiding loss. Convincing myself solitude was strength. But you walked into my life and proved me wrong about everything, Martha's heart hammered. Ezekiel, let me finish. His hand came up, cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I know what I feel, and I know it's not gratitude or obligation or convenience. It's, he faltered, love, Martha finished, the word escaping before she could stop it. It's love, and it's terrifying, and I feel it too. His eyes closed briefly, like she'd given him absolution. I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone. How to not destroy something precious through sheer incompetence. Neither do I. Martha reached up, covering his hand with hers. But I'm a quick learner. You taught me that. He kissed her then, or maybe she kissed him, later, neither could say for certain who moved first. It was not gentle or practiced. It was desperate and honest and tasted like coffee and salvation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Martha felt like she'd crossed some threshold that had no return path. We should probably talk about this, Ezekiel said, voice rough. Figure out what happens next. What happens next is breakfast burns if I don't stir it. Martha turned back to the pot, but couldn't stop smiling. Everything else can wait. Winter deepened, and with it, their connection. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's silences. Ezekiel taught Martha to set trap lines and check them daily. Martha taught Ezekiel that organizing tools saved time and frustration. They worked together to expand the cabin's storage, to improve its insulation, to make it not just survivable but comfortable. The physical aspect of their relationship developed slowly, carefully, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. Martha had never been touched with anything resembling tenderness. Ezekiel had spent so long alone he'd forgotten how to be gentle. But they learned, taking time to understand what brought pleasure, what caused pain, what made the other feel seen and valued. You're beautiful, Ezekiel told her one night, tracing the curve of her hip with calloused fingers. Not in spite of anything. Just beautiful. Martha wanted to deflect, to list all the ways she didn't measure up to conventional standards. But his eyes told her he meant it, truly meant it, and she'd learned to trust his honesty above all else. So are you, she said instead, and watched him smile, but their peace was temporary, and both of them knew it. In mid-January, during a brief weather break, they spotted smoke in the valley, too much smoke, too dark. Something was burning in Dry Willow, could be anything, Ezekiel said, but his voice was tight with concern. Chimney fire. Barn accident, or raiders. Martha studied the smoke through the window. The same ones we drove off might have gone looking for easier targets. We can't get down there. Snow's too deep, weather too unpredictable. We'd die on the trail, I know. But guilt gnawed at her. Her store was down there. Thomas, the young man she'd left in charge. Neighbors who'd known her father. When the weather clears, when it clears, we go down together. Check on things. Make sure people are safe. He put his arm around her shoulders. But we survive first. Can't help anyone if we're frozen on the mountain. 3 weeks later, a break in the weather gave them their chance. They packed light. Moved fast, descended the mountain in one brutal day of hiking through deep snow. By the time they reached Dry Willow at dusk, both were exhausted, but what they found drove fatigue away like ice water. The town was scarred. Buildings burned, several completely destroyed. The saloon was gone, just a blackened foundation. The church had lost its steeple. And Martha's store, her father's store, had its windows shattered, door hanging from broken hinges. She ran toward it, heart in her throat, Ezekiel close behind. Inside was chaos. Inventory scattered, shelves overturned, the register pried open and emptied. But no bodies. No blood. Just destruction, Martha Bell. A voice from the doorway made her spin. Rifle coming up instinctively. Sheriff Dawson stood there, hands raised peacefully. Easy. It's just me, what happened? Martha demanded. Where's Thomas? Where? Raiders hit us 2 weeks back. 6 men, maybe 7. Burned what they couldn't steal, took what they could carry. Thomas is fine, got out when they came. Most folks did. We had warning, managed to evacuate. But, he looked at her apologetically. They were looking for you specifically. Or rather, looking for Crow. Word got out about you two up on the mountain. They wanted revenge for the men you killed. When they couldn't find you, they took it out on the town. Martha felt cold spread through her chest. This was her fault. Her and Ezekiel's. Their survival had brought destruction down on innocent people. How many dead? Ezekiel asked, voice flat. None, thank heavens. But we've got injured folks, property damage, and those men are still out there. They said they'd be back. The sheriff's eyes were hard. They said they won't stop until they find the woman who shot their friends and the man who started this whole mess. Said they'd burn this town to foundations if that's what it takes. Martha and Ezekiel exchanged a look. In it, Martha saw grim determination mirroring her own. They'd run once, fled to the mountains to avoid trouble. But trouble had followed, and now innocent people were paying the price. Then we end this, Martha said. We find them. We stop them. Permanently. Sheriff Dawson frowned. That's a job for the law. The law is one man with a badge in a town full of wounded people, Ezekiel interrupted. These raiders are military trained, probably ex-Confederate guerrillas who never stopped fighting. You need fighters. We're fighters, this isn't your fight, they made it our fight. Martha's voice was hard as mountain granite. They attacked my town. My store. My neighbors. And they did it because of me. That makes it very much my fight. The sheriff studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But we do this smart. No vigilante justice. We find their camp, we bring enough men, and we end this properly. Agreed, Martha said, but as she looked at the destruction around her. At the town that had never quite accepted her but was still hers, she made a private promise. These men had mistaken her for easy prey twice now. Once in her store. Once on her mountain. They wouldn't get a third chance. The raider camp wasn't hard to find once you knew what to look for. Ezekiel tracked them through the snow with the methodical patience of a man who'd spent years reading the forest's language. Boot prints, broken branches, discarded tobacco tins, the remains of hasty fires, each sign a word in a story that led north into the foothills, to an abandoned logging camp that offered shelter and concealment. Martha followed his lead, moving quietly despite the deep snow. Her rifle comfortable in her hands now like an extension of her own body. Behind them came Sheriff Dawson and 4 men from town, Tom Brennan, surprisingly spry for his age, Jacob Chen, Sarah's husband and a former cavalry scout, and 2 younger men, the Morrison brothers, who'd lost their barn to the raiders' torches and wanted payment in kind. They'd spent 2 days preparing, gathering intelligence from trappers and hunters who knew these mountains, assembling weapons and supplies, planning their approach with military precision. Martha had suggested waiting for more men, but the sheriff had shaken his head grimly. This is everyone willing to fight. Most folks are too scared. Too injured, or too busy trying to rebuild. 7 of us against maybe 6 of them. Close enough to even odds. Now, crouched in the tree line overlooking the logging camp, Martha counted 5 men visible around a fire, with probably 1 or 2 more inside the main building. The odds weren't as favorable as the sheriff had hoped. We could wait them out, Jacob Chen suggested quietly. Siege them. They'll run out of food before we do, and give them time to fortify, set traps, maybe send for reinforcements if they've got more gang members scattered around. Ezekiel studied the camp with cold assessment. We hit them now, hit them hard, don't give them time to organize, that's not exactly lawful procedure. Sheriff Dawson said, but his tone suggested he agreed, neither is burning towns and terrorizing innocent people. Martha kept her voice low. These men aren't going to surrender peacefully, Sheriff. You know that. We all know that. The silence that followed told her she was right. These weren't simple thieves who turned themselves in if confronted. These were hardened men who'd spent the war years learning to kill and had found no reason to stop when the fighting ended. Mercy would be seen as weakness, negotiation as opportunity for ambush. All right, Dawson finally said. But we do this clean. We announce ourselves, give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They moved into position as the sun set, using the growing darkness for cover. The plan was simple because complicated plans fell apart under stress. The sheriff and 3 men would approach from the east, the most obvious route, drawing attention. Ezekiel, Martha, and Tom Brennan would circle to the west, covering the back of the main building in case anyone tried to flee. Martha settled into her position behind a fallen log, rifle rested on the wood, sight line clear to the building's rear door. Tom Brennan was 10 yards to her left, Ezekiel the same distance to her right. Good spacing, close enough for support, far enough that one shot wouldn't take out all 3 of them. You scared? Ezekiel asked softly, his voice barely carrying through the cold air. Terrified, Martha admitted. But also angry. These men came to my town, hurt my people, and they did it because they assumed I'd be too afraid to fight back. I'm done being underestimated. You were never what they thought you were, no. But now I'm going to make sure they know it. She checked her rifle again, a nervous habit she couldn't break. Ezekiel, if this goes wrong, it won't, but if it does, I want you to know, she struggled for words adequate to the feeling. You gave me myself back. The person I was supposed to be before the world told me I was wrong. That's worth more than survival. That's worth everything. He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them that was beyond words. Understanding. Recognition. Love too deep for simple declaration. We're going to survive this, he said firmly. Both of us. And then we're going to build a life that makes all this struggle worth it. Understood, understood, Sheriff Dawson's voice carried across the camp, amplified by cold air and tension. This is Sheriff Dawson of Dry Willow. You men in the camp, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up, and nobody needs to get hurt. The response was immediate gunfire. Muzzle flashes erupted from the camp, bullets tearing through the darkness. The raiders weren't interested in negotiation. So much for giving them a chance, Tom Brennan muttered, raising his rifle. The fight that followed was chaos broken by moments of terrible clarity. Martha tracked movement through the camp, took shots when targets presented themselves, conserved ammunition like Ezekiel had taught her. 2 raiders broke from the main building's back door, running for the forest. Tom dropped one with a shot that echoed like thunder. The other kept running, and Martha led him with her rifle, feeling the shot more than calculating it, and fired. The man went down hard, tumbling into the snow. She'd hit him, but where, she couldn't tell from this distance. He wasn't moving. That was enough. More gunfire from the front, the sheriff's group pressing the attack. Someone screamed, cut off abruptly. Friend or enemy? No way to know. Martha reloaded, hands steady despite the fear singing through her veins, and searched for new targets. A raider appeared at the building's side window, rifle rising toward where Sheriff Dawson's muzzle flashes had been. Martha didn't think, just adjusted her aim and fired. The window exploded. The raider fell back inside. Good shot, Ezekiel called. He was moving now, using the chaos to advance toward the building, and Martha's heart climbed into her throat. Too exposed. Too dangerous, but he knew what he was doing. While the raiders focused on the frontal assault, Ezekiel reached the building's corner, pulled something from his belt, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck, struck a match, and hurled the improvised firebomb through the broken window. Flames erupted inside. Men shouted, panicked. 3 raiders burst from the front door directly into Sheriff Dawson's line of fire. 2 went down immediately. The third made it 5 steps before Jacob Chen's rifle spoke and he collapsed face first in the snow. 1 more emerged from the flames, clothes smoking, weapon abandoned, hands raised in surrender. The sheriff took him at gunpoint, forcing him to his knees in the snow, then silence. The kind of silence that came after violence. Heavy with smoke and cordite and the ringing aftermath of gunfire. Martha stayed in position, rifle ready, scanning for movement. It took 3 full minutes before Ezekiel called the all clear. She emerged from cover on shaking legs. The logging camp was a scene from nightmare, bodies in the snow, the building burning, the copper smell of blood mixing with wood smoke. But when she counted, relief flooded through her. All 7 of their group were still standing, though Jacob Chen was clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him, and one of the Morrison brothers limped heavily. The raiders had fared worse. For dead, 1 wounded and unconscious by the back door, the 1 Tom had shot, and 1 prisoner. 6 total. If there had been a 7th, he'd fled into the forest and good riddance. Sheriff Dawson secured the prisoner's hands with rope, then looked at their group with something like grim satisfaction. It's done. This gang won't terrorize anyone else, but the prisoner, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, looked directly at Martha and laughed, a broken, hateful sound. You think this ends it? You think Garrett's going to let this go? He wasn't even here tonight, lady. He's still out there, and when he hears what you did, let him come, Martha said coldly. She walked toward the prisoner, rifle in hand, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Recognition and, finally, fear. Let him come to Dry Willow. Let him face me directly. Because I'm done running, done hiding, done being afraid of men like you who think violence makes them strong. Tell him Martha Bell is waiting. Tell him she shoots back. The prisoner's laugh died in his throat. He looked at her, really looked, seeing past the soft body and plain face to something that made him go pale, and said nothing more. They marched back to Dry Willow in the gray dawn, bringing the prisoner and weapons taken from the dead raiders. Word spread quickly. By the time they reached the main street, people lined the boardwalks, wounded, grieving, but also relieved. The threat was ended. The town was safe. Martha expected celebration, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, she found herself facing a mixed reaction. Some people nodded respect. Tom Brennan made a point of tipping his hat to her. Sarah Chin embraced her with tears in her eyes. But others looked at her with something like fear, whispering behind their hands. A woman who could track raiders through snow and shoot men dead wasn't comfortable. Wasn't proper. Wasn't safe. Mrs. Henderson approached with her mouth set in a thin line. Well, I suppose we should thank you, Miss Bell. Though I must say, there are those who wonder if perhaps the raiders wouldn't have come at all if you hadn't. She paused delicately. Provoked them. Martha felt anger flash hot, but before she could respond, Ezekiel stepped forward. His presence commanded attention even in silence, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the street. You want to blame someone? Blame the men who chose to burn your town. Blame the men who terrorized your families. Blame the men who assumed they could take whatever they wanted without consequences. He gestured to Martha. Don't blame the woman who had the courage to stand up to them when most of you hid in your cellars hoping the violence would pass you by. Now see here, someone started to protest. No. You see here. Ezekiel's voice went hard as winter stone. Martha Bell defended herself in her own store when 3 men tried to assault her. She defended my cabin when raiders tried to rob it. And she just helped defend this entire town from a gang of killers. If you're looking to assign blame, I suggest you look in a mirror and ask yourselves why it took a woman you've mocked and dismissed to show more courage than all of you combined." Silence fell across the street. People shifted uncomfortably. Some had the grace to look ashamed. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. "He's right. Miss Bell saved lives tonight. This town owes her a debt, whether you're comfortable admitting it or not." The crowd dispersed slowly, awkwardly. Martha stood in the middle of the street, feeling Ezekiel's presence at her shoulder like an anchor. And realized something fundamental had changed. Not in her, she'd been changing all winter, becoming stronger, more capable, more herself. But in how the town saw her. Fear mixed with respect was still better than pity mixed with contempt. She'd take it. The next weeks passed in a blur of reconstruction. Martha's store required extensive repairs, but Thomas had protected most of the inventory, and with help from neighbors, grudging help in some cases, enthusiastic in others, they rebuilt stronger than before. Martha installed proper shutters that could be barred from inside, reinforced the door, created a firing position in the loft for defense. "You're building a fortress," Thomas observed. Amused, "I'm building a store that won't be easy prey," Martha corrected. "There's a difference." Ezekiel helped when he could, but he spent most of his time preparing to return to his mountain cabin. Winter was loosening its grip, but another month would pass before the passes fully opened. They stole what time they could together, though the town's watchful eyes made privacy difficult. "Come with me," Ezekiel said one night as they stood on the store's back porch, watching stars emerge. "Back to the cabin. Live there with me. We could make it work, expand it, build proper rooms, create something lasting." "What about the store?" Martha asked, though her heart leaped at the possibility. "Sell it. Or hire someone permanent to run it. Or," he took her hand. "Or we could split our time. Winter in the mountains where it's safe and quiet. Summer down here managing the store. Best of both worlds," Martha considered. 6 months ago, this store had been her entire identity, her sole purpose. Now it was just a building, inventory, accounts. Important, but not everything. "Not anymore. I'd need to arrange things properly. Set up a real management system. Ensure the finances are stable. I can't just abandon it." "I'm not asking you to abandon anything." Ezekiel squeezed her hand. "I'm asking you to choose what you want, not what you think you should want." That was the question. Wasn't it? What did she want? Not what her father would have wanted, not what the town expected, not what convention dictated. What did Martha Bell want for her own life? The answer came with surprising clarity. She wanted both. The mountain cabin with its silence and safety. The town store with its purpose and community. And most of all, she wanted the man beside her, the partnership they built from necessity and transformed into something irreplaceable. "All right," she said. "I'll come with you. But we do it properly. We get married, make it official. I won't live in sin just to spare the town's sensibilities, but I also won't give them ammunition for gossip." Ezekiel blinked. Surprise flickering across his face. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his hard features into something almost gentle. "Are you proposing to me, Martha Bell?" "I'm stating practical requirements for cohabitation." But she couldn't help smiling back. "Well, do you agree to my terms?" "I do." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in violence and fear and had chosen, deliberately and courageously, to build something better. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the Methodist minister who'd never quite approved of Martha but couldn't argue with her obvious competence. Sarah Chin stood as witness, beaming with genuine happiness. Sheriff Dawson gave Martha away, since her father couldn't. The town attended with mixed emotions, some celebrating, some skeptical, all curious about this unlikely union. Martha wore a practical dress in deep blue, her mother's ring on her finger, her hair braided in a crown that made her look almost regal. Ezekiel cleaned up surprisingly well, his wild hair trimmed, his beard neat, wearing what might have been his only set of town clothes. "Do you take this woman?" the minister began. "I do," Ezekiel interrupted, impatient with formality. "I take her exactly as she is, which is perfect." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "I take him too. As he is." "Which is exactly right," the minister sighed but continued the ceremony. When they kissed, it was brief, proper, and entirely inadequate for the depth of feeling between them. But there would be time for more later, in the privacy of their cabin, in the life they were building together. The following day, they left Dry Willow. Martha had arranged for Thomas to manage the store with 25% ownership, enough stake to ensure loyalty and good management. The finances were organized, the inventory cataloged, the systems in place. The store would survive without her, might even thrive. The climb back to the cabin took the full day, but this time Martha didn't struggle. Her body was stronger. Her lungs adapted to altitude, her mind clear about where she was going and why. When the cabin appeared through the trees, she felt something unexpected. "Homecoming, welcome home, Mrs. Crow," Ezekiel said, grinning at the name. "Welcome home, Mr. Bell," Martha replied, because she'd kept her name and he'd agreed without argument, understanding that identity wasn't something to be surrendered. They spent that spring and summer transforming the cabin. Ezekiel built an addition, a proper bedroom, a larger workspace, a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. Martha established a garden, planted seeds she'd brought from town, created systems for preserving food that would make winter scarcity less severe. They hunted together, worked together, lived together with an ease that surprised them both. In August, Martha discovered she was pregnant. The revelation came with complicated emotions: fear of childbirth in the wilderness, joy at the possibility of family, uncertainty about how this would change their lives. But when she told Ezekiel, his face transformed with such pure happiness that her fears quieted. "The child," he breathed, hand moving to her still flat stomach. "Our child, are you ready for this?" Martha asked. "Everything will change, everything already changed. When you walked into my life and refused to be small or afraid or anything less than yourself." He kissed her forehead. "This is just the next chapter." They prepared through the autumn, building a cradle, gathering supplies, making plans for Martha to be in town for the birth. But when winter came early again, when the passes closed before they could descend, Martha found herself strangely calm about the prospect of giving birth in a cabin. She'd survived raiders and blizzards and learning to be strong. She could survive this too. Their daughter was born in February during a 3-day snowstorm, delivered with Ezekiel's steady hands and Martha's stubborn determination. They named her Sarah, after Ezekiel's lost sister, and raised her to be fearless and kind in equal measure. Years passed. The cabin expanded further, extra bedrooms for the 2 more children who followed Sarah. A proper root cellar, improved defenses. The town below changed too, growing more prosperous, more accepting. Martha's store thrived under Thomas's management, providing steady income that supplemented their mountain life. They split their time as planned, winters in the high country where the world was clean and simple, summers in Dry Willow where Martha managed her business and participated in community life. It wasn't the traditional path, but it was theirs, built deliberately from choice rather than circumstance. One evening, 15 years after that night in the store when 3 drunk cattle drivers had tried to break her, Martha stood on her expanded porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Sarah was inside helping her younger siblings with reading lessons. Ezekiel was splitting wood for the night, his movement still strong and sure despite the gray threading heavy through his hair now. He caught her watching and smiled. "What are you thinking about? How far we've come. How much has changed." She gestured to the cabin, solid and welcoming, to the garden thriving in the mountain soil, to the life they'd built together through determination and love. "I was so afraid back then. Afraid of everything. you were never afraid. You were just waiting to remember your strength. He set down the axe, joined her on the porch. You always had it in you, maybe. But you helped me find it. She took his hand, scarred and calloused and perfect. We helped each other find it. From inside the cabin came the sound of children laughing, the warmth of fire and family and home. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to their story, guardian of their peace. And Martha Bell Crow, who'd once been told she was too much woman for any man to want, stood solid and sure in the life she'd claimed for herself, proving that strength came in many forms and the best revenge was living well. The world had learned her name. And it would never forget.